Good morning, Elvis. Thanks for having me.
Now, Ambassador, firstly, what led to the latest confrontation between Israel and Hamas?
Well, what's happened is Hamas is bombing our civilians. And they're just taking rockets and shooting them randomly on the cities and the civilians of Israel. What would South Africa do if a neighboring country was sending missiles on Limpopo or on Gauteng? You'd respond, you'd protect your people. And that's exactly what we're doing.
But why did it happen in the first place? What led to it?
Well, Hamas calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. They continue to do it. They believe that there should be no state of Israel and that we should be gone. And we're going to live there. We're going to protect our people. We're going to try to make peace with our Palestinian neighbors. The Palestinians are not our enemies. But the Hamas continues to act in a manner that's threatening our people and their own.
Now, you seem to be blaming each other on who is really responsible for the latest standoff, because Hamas, apparently, you are blaming them for the 3 youth that were killed.
Well, to be sure, there's no question that happened, that Hamas activists in the West Bank came, kidnapped, and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers. But that's one point. The fact is continually, since 2005, missiles have been coming from Gaza into Israel. Just the other night, 2 nights ago, there was a wedding in Israel. Can you imagine having a wedding and in the middle of the ceremony, an air raid siren goes off and all the guests and the participants and the bride and the groom have to run for cover? You can't live that way. Nobody can live that way. South Africa wouldn't.
Now, the international community has asked for the resumption of peace talks between Israel and Hamas. Are you prepared to go back to the table with Hamas on the issue?
Well, we're not having peace talks with Hamas. We're having peace talks with the Palestinian Authority, and we would like to see those resumed. But Hamas continues to call for the destruction of Israel. We can't exist. We can't be there. There's nothing to talk about with them. I think that there is lots to talk about between Israel and the Palestinians. We're trying to use as much restraint as we possibly can. The Palestinians aren't our enemy. We seek peace with our neighbors in a crazy, complicated region.
Now, in the previous report that we just played, we heard that the Palestinian President, Abbas, has extended an olive branch. But it seems like Prime Minister Netanyahu is continuing to threaten attacks. Don't you think that this will make Israel appear to be the aggressor, though?
Well, but we're not. We're not. We're acting in self-defense like a normal country would in an abnormal region. We're in a region where Iraq is in flames, where Syria, the citizens are being killed by their own government, where there's instability in Libya and in Egypt. We need to control our area and allow our civilians, our people, to live normal lives. That's exactly what any country would do, and it's exactly what South Africa would do, and it's what we're going to do.
Now, Hamas has blamed you for violating the 2012 peace talks and the illegal occupation of Palestinian land. What do you say to that, though?
Well, Hamas, again, believes that there should be no state of Israel. They're taking missiles and firing them on civilian areas. That's a war crime. Mm-hmm. They're taking their own civilians and telling them to go up on buildings and get bombed by the Israelis. So they're putting their own civilians in danger. They're putting our civilians in danger. They don't have any respect for human life or anything that's holy. The truth is Israelis and Palestinians deserve better. Palestinians are our neighbors. We need to live in peace with them. Hamas is endangering that peace.
There's also suggestions that Israel is involved in land grabs within Palestine. Is that correct, and do you concur with that assertion?
No, I think that Israel and the Palestinians need to negotiate a peace. That's a separate issue. We need to deal with our tough issues. The Israelis and Palestinians need to get divorced. You in South Africa needed to get married. There's a key difference, obviously. We need to negotiate that peace, and we've been trying for years. The Hamas bombing of civilians is something different. Mm-hmm. That since we left Gaza in 2005, we have no land interest there. There's no Israeli presence. There's no Israeli claims. Hamas just wants to attack Israel because they want us gone. It's not going to happen. We're going to stay. We're going to live our lives peacefully, successfully, and try to make peace with our Palestinian neighbors, because that's what Palestinians and Israelis deserve.
Now, you're talking about that divorce between the two countries. So where do you see the borders being drawn between the two countries, though?
Well, that's something, obviously, that negotiators have to work out in a boardroom, in a negotiating room, not by sending missiles, not by threatening weddings or people's lives or your own people. We need to recognize each other's existence. We need to respect each other's peace. That's something that Israel does. By the way, it's something that often we've done with Palestinian leaders. It's never been possible with Hamas. That's the reason that, as your report said, that Egypt has no relationship with Hamas, that other Arab governments understand that Hamas is violent, aggressive, and hurts the interests of the Palestinian people.
Now, the United States has been a very close ally of Israel for many years, and the United States President Barack Obama has reportedly now praised the Palestinian President Abbas for his commitment to a two-state solution and cooperation with Israel. What is the Israeli government's view on this issue? Do you think that could happen?
Well, we do support the idea of a two-state solution. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said it many times. We believe in a state of Palestine next to a state of Israel, living next to each other in peace. That's good for the Palestinians. That's good for Israelis. We have to talk about it in a peaceful, quiet negotiation. Sending missiles on civilian populations, trying to kill civilians, giving out candies when young people get kidnapped, and celebrating that as martyrdom isn't a way to build a society, isn't a way to move the Palestinian people forward. The Palestinians deserve better.
So what do you see as a solution here?
Well, right now, the Hamas needs to be stopped. The quiet needs to come to the Gaza Strip because that's good for Palestinians and good for Israelis. Once quiet comes back, I hope very quickly we can find a time for peace talks to continue because that's good for Israelis and good for Palestinians. And I think that the international community has to stand clearly and say that such terrorism, such violence, such kidnapping and killing of teenagers is unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and that states are allowed, are permitted, are required to protect their civilians. And that's what Israel's doing in a way that we can find peace and live with our neighbors.
Ambassador Lenk, the United Nations is now holding an emergency meeting regarding the situation. What are your expectations of that meeting? Well,
the Secretary General of the United Nations yesterday, Secretary Ban, was quoted by calling on Hamas to stop the rockets. Stop the rockets. Stop attacking civilians. It's a war crime. I think he's right. Leaders from all over the world are saying that, and that we have to find a way to return to calm, to return to negotiation, to take care of Israelis and Palestinians, and take care of that way so that our neighborhood can go back to a peaceful area.
Ambassador Lenk, thank you so much for your time, and all the best of luck.
Thank you, Elvis.
That was Arthur Lenk, the Israeli ambassador to South Africa. Now, you have to stay